Welcome students. Today in this video we will discuss about sexual reproduction in flowering plants. So let us discuss our today's topic. So before discussing about the process of sexual reproduction in flowering plants, it is necessary to know that what is reproduction, why it is necessary, and what are the types of reproduction. So, reproduction is an integral feature of all living organisms, and it is the process by which an organism produces the organisms of its own kind. So, the question arises, why organisms reproduce? Because it is an inherent property of all living organisms to maintain their species, and this is an inherent, inborn, innate property of all living organisms that they can reproduce to produce new generation individuals. If they do not produce the next generation individual, then it will lead or it affects to the survival of the species. So organisms reproduce to maintain the continuity of their species or to maintain the continuity of their race. All living organisms, whether it is unicellular organisms or multicellular organisms, means plants or animals, all organisms reproduce by various methods so as to continue their species. It is one of the most important process for the existence of life on the earth. Reproduction is one of the most important fundamental characteristic feature that helps to maintain the continuity of life on earth. It also helps to maintain balance in the nature and between the various components of the ecosystem or atmosphere. Reproduction also helps in the process of evolution because by the process of sexual reproduction, variation brought about in the generations which help in the formation of new generations. Now let us discuss what is what are the types of reproduction. There are basically two main types of reproduction. First, asexual reproduction, and second, sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction, the process which do not involve the formation and fusion of gametes. So, in this process, a single parent is involved and there is no gamete formation or fusion of gametes takes place. Therefore, it is called as the asexual reproduction. In this type of reproduction, no meiosis cell division takes place during the process. Second one is the sexual reproduction, the process which involve the formation and fusion of gametes is called as sexual reproduction. The formation of gametes involve the process of meiosis or meiotic cell division. It is an important step in the sexual reproduction because with the help of meiosis, number of chromosome remain constant throughout the generations. There are various methods of asexual reproduction is found in the members of different groups like Protistan, Monera, Plantae, Fungi, Animalia. So they all reproduce by various methods of asexual reproduction like budding, fragmentation, regeneration, multiple fission, and in sexual reproduction, usually it involves the formation and fusion of two types of gametes. It may be possible that these two types of gamete may be produced in a single organism, or it may be produced in two different organisms. So this is all about the basics of reproduction. Now we can start the process of sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Flowers are the main reproductive organ of all angiospermic plants. A typical flower contains four parts, that is calyx, corolla, androecium and gynoecium. Calyx and corolla are considered as a accessory reproductive organ because they do not have any role directly in the process of sexual reproduction. Their basic function is to protect a flower in bud condition, and like corolla, it have attract insect for the process of cross pollination because it is usually bright in color. While sepal is usually green in color, a single unit of calyx is called as the sepal. So they are usually uh, green in color. So they help to protect a flower in bud condition, and as they are green in color, they also perform photosynthesis to produce their own food. Androecium and gynoecium are the main reproductive organ of flowers. Androecium is the male reproductive part, while gynoecium is the female reproductive part of the flower. A single unit of male reproductive system or androecium is called as the stamen, which consists of anther and filament, while the female reproductive system's unit is known as carpel or pistil, and it comprises of stigma, style, and ovary. If a flower contains only male reproductive organ, then the flower is considered as the male or the staminate flower. And if a flower contains only the female reproductive part, that is gynoecium or carpel or pistil, then it is called as the pistillate flower. And if a flower contains all types of reproductive organs plus accessory reproductive organs, means calyx, corolla, androecium, and gynoecium, then the flower is called as the perfect flower or complete flower. And if any one part of out of this four is missing or absent from in the flower, then it is considered as imperfect or incomplete flower. Flower is a modified shoot or bud arising from the apical part of the shoot or branches or from the axis of leaves for reproduction. So basically, flowers are the modification of stem or modification of shoot. In stem, in the apical part, they are having meristematic tissue in which floral primordial cells are present. When this floral primordial cells divide or develops, they form floral buds, and then these floral buds further develop into a flower. Reproductive of the flower, parts of the flower, as we have already discussed, androecium is the male reproductive whorl consisting of the stamens. Gynoecium is the female reproductive part of the flower, which consists of carpels or uh, pistil. It carpel may be one or many. Now, the male reproductive part of the flower, as we have already discussed, is called as the androecium, and it is made up of one or more stamens. The single unit of androecium is called as the stamen or microsporophylls, because the male gamete which is formed in this androecium are smaller in size. They are called as the microspores. So hence stamens are also called as the microsporophylls. Stamen consists of the two main parts, that is filament and anther. The long tubular part through which anthers are attached to the thalamus of the flower is called as the filament, and upper bilobed structure is called as the anther. Now, this is the internal structure of a mature anther. The first diagram is showing the generalized structure of a mature anther, in which you can see as in center part there is a connective. It is a connection of filament to the anther, and then you can see the four circles or four chambers. These are called as the pollen chambers or theca. Generally, a typical anther in angiospermic flowers is bilobed and tetrathecus. Now, what is bilobed condition? As you can see in the diagram, that there are two lobes present in the anther, and these two lobes are connected with the connective, and each lobe is further divided into two chambers which are called as the theca. So now it means a typical angiospermic anther consists of the two lobe. This condition is the bilobed condition, and each lobe consists of the two chambers. So it means an anther contains four chamber. It is called as the tetrathecus condition. The a typical angiospermic anther is bilobed and tetrathecus. Now, as you can see in the diagram, this is a B enlarged structure to show various kinds of cells and various layers in an angiospermic anther. The outermost layer is called as the epidermis. It is a single layered structure, and its function is the protection of inner part of the anther. Then endothecium and middle layer, they may be single layer or multi-layered. They also helps in the protection of inner tissues or cells of the uh, anther. Now, in the center part, you can see the microspore mother cell and tapetum. So the fourth layer is the tapetum. First is epidermis, then endothecium, then middle layer, and the last one is the tapetum. The cells of tapetum provide nutrition to the developing pollen grains or the male gametes, we can say. And the inner mass of the microsporangium or the anther consist of the microspore mother cell. They are basically from sporogenous tissue, and each cell of sporogenous tissue can act as a microspore mother cell. This microspore mother cell, by the process of meiotic cell division, so each microspore mother cell MMC can produce 4 microspore, that is 4 pollen grain. When this microspore mother cells divides by the process of meiosis, 4 haploid male gametes, or we can say pollen grains, are formed. Now you can see in the diagram, see that a mature a mature anther, when pollen grains are formed, there is a gap present between the membrane. This is the dehiscence, line of dehiscence. So from this point, dehiscence takes place. The rupture of upper layer of microsporangium, or the process of rupturing of epidermis, then middle layer and endothecium, so as to release pollen grain into the atmosphere. So this process of releasing of pollen grain is called as the uh, dehiscence. Actually, releasing of pollen grain nahi. Basically, the process of rupturing of anther so as to release pollen grain is called as the dehiscence. Okay, moving on to the next. Structure of anther, this we have already discussed, that it is a bilobed and tetrathecus structure. A longitudinal groove separates the theca means chambers. In a cross section, anther is tetragonal structure, that 4 lobes are present consisting of 4 microsporangia, 2 in each lobe. Bilobed tetrathecus condition, it is the characteristic feature of angiospermic plants. Later 2 microsporangium of each lobe fused as a pollen sac, pollen chamber or pollen sac they form. All these things we have already discussed. Now the structure of anther, as we have discussed earlier in the diagrams, a microsporangium is circular and surrounded by 4 layers. These are epidermis, endothecium, middle layer, and tapetum. Uh, Outermost layer protect the pollen and help in dehiscence of anther to release pollen. Tapetum nourishes the developing pollen grains. When the anther is young, a group of compactly arranged homogeneous cells called sporogenous tissues occupy the center of each microsporangium that we have already discussed. That center part of the microsporangium is occupied by some sporogenous tissue, and we have already discussed that each cell of sporogenous tissue is able to produce a microspore, so they are called as the microspore mother cell, MMC. Now, the process of microsporogenesis, the process of formation of microspore from a pollen mother cell, PMC, through meiosis is called microsporogenesis. The process by which pollen grains are formed from the pollen mother cell or microspore mother cell is called as the microsporogenesis. Microspore means that microspore is male gamete or pollen grain, and genesis means originate, to originate. So the process of formation of male gamete or pollen grains is called as the microsporogenesis. Now, how it is takes place? The cells of sporogenous tissue undergoes meiosis to form microspore tetrad arranged in a cluster of 4 cells. So when the cells of sporogenous tissue they start dividing by the process of meiosis, each cell can produce microspore tetrad. Why it is called as a microspore tetrad? Because 4 cells are formed. So hence this condition is called as the tetrad condition. As each cell of sporogenous tissue has potential to form a tetrad, so each cell is a microspore mother cell, MMC, or pollen mother cell, that is PMC, that we have already discussed. On maturation and dehydration of anther, the spore dissociate and develop into pollen grains. When these cells of microspore tetrad, these 4 cells of microspore tetrad, when they get dry by dehydration, and they get dissociate, they get separated from each other, and then finally develop into uh, separate pollen grains. When these pollen grains are formed, they are released from the microsporangium by the dehiscence of anther. Now, pollen grain or the male gametophyte. The pollen grain or represent the male gametophyte in angiospermic flowers or angiospermic plants. It is a spherical structure. It is having a two-layered wall. Outer layer is called as the exine, and the inner layer is called as the intine. The outer layer, that is exine, is comparatively hard, and it is made up of sporopollenin. Now, one more most important thing, that sporopollenin is the most resistant known biological substance, and no means it can withstand with high temperature, acids, alkalis, and enzyme. So, in general, in a natural condition, it cannot be degraded by anything. It has a prominent aperture. That exine is having a prominent aperture which is called as the germ pore, where sporopollenin is absent. Now, what is the significance of this germ pore? From here, pollen tube formation or pollen tube formation takes place so as to release male gametes from the pollen grains. Inner layer is called as the intine. It is comparatively a thin and continuous layer, and it is made up of cellulose and pectin. That means in a pollen grain or in a male gametophyte, there are 2 layers, exine and intine. Exine is made up of sporopollenin, and intine is made up of cellulose and pectin. Now, pollen grain or male gametophyte, the structure and development. Pollen grain cytoplasm is in pollen grain cytoplasm is surrounded by plasma membrane. Mature pollen grains has 2 cells, vegetative cells and generative cell. Now, as you can see in the diagram, in the last diagram, you can see 2 cells are present in a mature pollen grain. That is, as you can see in the diagram, there are two cells are present in a mature pollen grain, that is vegetative cell and generative cell. Large one is the vegetative cell and the smaller one is the generative cell. Vegetative cell is bigger, abundant in food material, and having a large irregular nucleus. As you can see, it is having a large amount of food reserves, so it will be used in the future. Generative cell, it is smaller in size, it may be spindle shaped with dense cytoplasm and the nucleus, and this generative cell, it floats in a vegetative cell cytoplasm. So major part of the pollen grain, the internal part of the pollen grain is consists of the vegetative cell, in which generative cell is floating. Now, in most of the plants, in 60% species, about approximately 60% species, pollen grains are shared in this two-celled stage. In which two-celled stage? That is the generative cell and the vegetative cell stage. But in 40% of the species, this generative cell is again divided into two male gametes. So now it results in the formation of three cell, that is the vegetative cell and the two male gametes. So in 40% of the species, when pollen grains detached from the plant body, or that get released from the pollen chambers, so it is in the three-celled stage. So in 60% stage, they leave the plant body in two-celled stage, that is vegetative and generative cell stage. And in 40% plants, it leaves the plant body in three-celled stage, that is one vegetative cell and then generative cell divided into two male gametes. So remember this, because this is asked in the question. This question is asked in exams two, 3 times. Okay. Next, pollen grains. About some other things about the pollen. Pollen grains are rich in nutrients. It has become a fashion in recent years to use pollen tablets as food supplements. In Western countries, a large number of pollen products in the form of tablets and syrups are available in the market. Pollen consumption has been claimed to increase the performance of athlete and race horses. Now, remember one thing, as we have already discussed just 2 3 slides back, कि the exine of the pollen grain is made up of sporopollenin. So it cannot be decomposed, it cannot be digested, but it has a germ pore. So when this pollen grains, or like in tablets, in powder form, or in syrups, it is consumed. So a small part of the cytoplasm, then pectin and inner content like protein and vitamins which may be present in the pollen grains, so they can be digested by our digestive systems. So they are very rich in nutritional values, hence they are used to increase the performance of athletes. Now, next is the development of female gametophyte, or the female reproductive system.